All right, so here's genetics, our lesson 2 group problems. For question 1, it asks, a child with blood types O, Rh negative, and M is born to a woman who has blood types O, Rh negative, and Mn, and a man who has blood types A, Rh positive, and M. Determine a possible genotype for each parent and for the child. So I just went through, and if you're type O, you're going to have 2 recessive I alleles, so I gave that both to the child and the mother. And since the child's O, the father has to be heterozygous for his blood type, so he would be A and little I. For the Rh minus, that's the recessive part, so both the mother and the child have 2 recessive Rs, while the father will be a heterozygote. And then since the child has 2 Ms, then that means both that the dad has to have 2 Ms and the mother is heterozygous. And then part B says a proportion of children born to a man with the genotype AB, heterozygous R, MN, and a woman who is heterozygous A, heterozygous R, and NN will have blood types B, Rh minus, and Mn. So I just went through and calculated the probability of each. The chance that you have a blood type A is 1/4, Mn is 1/4, and Rh plus is 1/4. So that comes out to 1 in 64. For part D, I did the same thing again. This time for the blood type, I got to be 1/4. To have Mn is 3/4. And then, for R. For the R, it's 3/4. And then the Mn, it's 1/4 again. So you get 3 out of 64. Part D, I got the man was wrong. It is possible for him to have a child like that if he was heterozygous for both the blood type and the Rh factor, and the mother was also heterozygous for those 2 as well. They could have a child that would have type O blood, Rh minus, and Mn blood group. For part 2, it wants us to figure out what are the possible genotypes for parents with progenies in those ratios. So for the first one, to have one of each, them all occurring in equal chances, I said you have to have a heterozygous parent with a recessive homozygous parent. And if you went through on the Punnett square, went through those, you'd end up getting a 1 walnut, 1 rose, 1 pea, and 1 single ratio. For part B, to get 3 rows and 1 single, that means the P would have to be recessive, so that's going to be lowercase on all of them. And then for the R, to get a 3-to-1 ratio, you'd have to have 2 heterozygous. So I had 2 heterozygous R and both recessive, homozygous recessive for P. For 1 rose, 1 single, once again, you have to have P's be recessive for both those traits. And then for R's, you'll have to have 1 heterozygous and then 1 homozygous recessive, and you get the 1-to-1 ratio. For the walnut and 3 walnut and 1 rose, you're going to have R's be capital, or homozygous dominant R's for both those traits. So then when it comes to the P, to get the 3-to-1 ratio for a walnut, once again, you have to have 2 heterozygotes for P. So I have it as seen in the picture right there. For part 3, I was looking at them and I thought it was incomplete dominance, since when you mix the 2, you get a blending, although it could be co-dominance, if you looked at the individual hairs, but I'm going to guess incomplete dominance or partial dominance. And then I said chestnut would be like 2 dominants and Cremello would be 2 recessive, although those could be switched since they are incomplete. And the Palomino would be the mixture of the 2, so that would be the heterozygote genotype. For part 4, I just found the answers. So the glycosol transferase is what does the A and B, and the type B puts on the sugar galactose. Overdominance is when heterozygotes have the advantage over either homozygote class. Incomplete penetrance is when you have the genotype but you don't show it. Epistasis is when one allele masks the phenotypic effects of another gene. The disease PKU can be alleviated by modifying a person's diet. The 2-to-1 phenotype ratio for monohybrid cross like the Manx, is lethal inheritance. I don't know why it's typed there twice. About the snail coal alien, so that's the maternal effect. So you just look at the genotypes of the females. So you'd still have 60% dextral and 40% sinistral. So it would be 6 dextral to 4 sinistral, or 3 dextral to 2 sinistral. And then for part H, when it's talking about the 4 o'clock plant, it's the maternal inheritance. So you just look at the females again. So since 60% of the, or 40% of the females are green, then 40% of the offspring will be green. And since 60% of the females are white, then 60% of the offspring will be white. So I got the 4:6 ratio for green to white. And then in the last part, we have to determine the genotypes and phenotypes of the parents that produce the offspring in the following cross. And they told us that black is dominant to sepia, sepia is dominant to cream, and cream is dominant to white. So to get 50% black and 50% sepia, you'll have to have like a black sepia crossed with a homozygous sepia, and that will give you that ratio. For 75% sepia and 25% cream, you'd have to have 2 heterozygotes for a sepia cream, and it comes out to 3:1, like 75 to 25%. For part C, to get 50% black, 25% sepia, and 25% white, I said you'll have to cross a heterozygote black-white with a heterozygote sepia-white, and you end up getting 50% black, 25% sepia, and 25% white. And then for the last part, to get 75% black and 25% white, you just cross 2 heterozygote black-white guinea pigs, and you'll get that ratio. And that was the lesson 2 genetics group problems.